Hello everyone, and welcome back to Dr. Creepy. Before we begin, take a moment to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment. Tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now get comfortable and let's start. I had been a park ranger in the Appalachian region for almost 9 years when the call started. Long enough to know that most emergencies follow patterns. Lost hikers panic early and make noise. Injured climbers stay put. Poachers run when they hear engines. Even the strange calls, the ones people whisper about, usually collapse under daylight and paperwork. This one didn't. It began just after 11:40 p.m. on a stretch of trail officially closed due to erosion and unstable ground. No camping allowed. No foot traffic after dusk. The kind of place that stays quiet enough that you can hear your own pulse when the wind drops. My radio crackled once softly, like interference brushing past a channel it didn't belong on. Then a voice came through. "Ranger, please, I can't see the trail anymore." Male voice, adult, breathing hard but not frantic. The signal was clean enough that I assumed a lost hiker had wandered past a closure sign, which happens more than people think. I answered with protocol. Identified myself, asked for a location marker, requested calm. There was a pause. Then the voice came back. "I'm by the old switchback, the one near the creek." That already bothered me. The switchback he described hadn't existed for over 10 years. It had been rerouted after a washout, and the old trail was intentionally obscured. You couldn't accidentally find it unless you were looking for it. Still, people lie. People exaggerate. I logged the call, checked the GPS coordinates where the signal pinged, and started driving. The first ping placed the caller roughly half a mile beyond the trail closure gate. Not ideal, but reachable. I parked, grabbed my light, and started in on foot. The woods were still heavy with that damp Appalachian smell. Rotting leaves, cold soil, old water, no insects, no owls. I remember noticing that absence because it felt like stepping into a held breath. About 10 minutes into the hike, the radio crackled again. "Ranger, I think I walked the wrong way." I stopped and asked him to stay where he was. Asked him to describe what he could see. "Trees," he said. "A slope. Running water nearby." His voice sounded closer now, clearer, like he was just around the bend. The GPS updated. The signal had moved. Not much. Maybe 200 yards uphill. I told myself he was walking while talking, ignoring instructions. It happens. I adjusted my route and kept going. The trail narrowed where it shouldn't have. Branches hung lower than usual, brushing my shoulders. My flashlight beam kept catching movement that turned out to be nothing, just leaves shifting back into place. I called out, identified myself verbally, and got no response except the sound of my own voice flattening into the trees. Then the radio came alive again. "I can hear you," the voice said, "but I don't see your light." I froze. I was standing still. My light was on. There was no line of sight obstruction between me and where the GPS said he was supposed to be. I should have seen something, anything. I asked him to describe what direction he was facing. "Downhill," he said, "toward you." The GPS updated again. The signal was now behind me. I turned slowly, sweeping my flashlight across the trees. Nothing stood there. No silhouette, no reflective eyes. Just forest pressed tightly together, branches overlapping like fingers interlocked. I told dispatch what was happening. They checked the system on their end and confirmed the same thing I was seeing. The signal wasn't drifting. It wasn't bouncing. It was relocating in clean, deliberate jumps. I asked the caller to stay silent for 10 seconds so I could triangulate. He didn't. Instead, he said, "Ranger, you walked past me." My skin went cold in a way that had nothing to do with the temperature. I asked him to repeat himself. "You walked right by," he said calmly. "I was on the left." I hadn't passed anyone. I was sure of that. The trail was narrow. There was nowhere someone could have stood unseen without brushing me, without breathing loud enough for me to hear. I told him to turn on a phone light if he had one. "I don't have a phone," he replied. "That's why I used the radio." That was impossible. Civilian radios don't access ranger frequencies. The channel he was on required a park-issued unit with encryption keys rotated monthly. I asked him how he got the radio. There was a pause long enough that I thought the signal had dropped. Then he answered, "I found it." The GPS jumped again. Now it was less than 50 feet from my position. I spun, heart hammering, light cutting sharp white slices through the dark. Still nothing. No sound of footsteps, no breathing, no rustle of clothing. Just my radio in my hand, suddenly warm. "Ranger," the voice said, closer than it should have been. "You're not going the right way." I backed up slowly until my shoulder hit a tree. I could feel the bark through my jacket. Solid. Real. I wasn't disoriented. I wasn't turned around. I told dispatch I was aborting the approach and requested backup. Dispatch responded, but not with the voice I recognized. The reply came in my own voice. "Copy that," it said. "Continue approach." I yanked the radio away from my face like it had burned me. My real voice echoed weakly in the trees as I shouted for confirmation. The channel went silent. Then the other voice came back. "You hear it too," it said. "It learned you fast." The GPS updated one last time. The signal was now exactly where I was standing. I don't remember running. I remember being at the truck. I remember my hands shaking so badly I dropped the keys twice. I remember locking the doors even though I knew that wouldn't matter if something wanted in. Dispatch finally came back on the line, real this time, asking why my signal had spiked and gone erratic. I told them everything, every detail. They logged it. They always do. A search team went out at first light. They found no one, no tracks, no radio, no sign of recent human presence. But they did find something else, my boot prints, a single set. They followed them from the trailhead to the old switchback, and then deeper, far past where I had turned around, past where I had never gone, past the point where the terrain drops sharply into ravine. The prints stopped at the edge. There were no signs of a fall, no disturbed soil, no slide marks, just my footprints, standing still, toes pointed into empty space. Since that night, I've transferred districts. I don't work nights anymore. I don't answer calls that come from closed trails. And I never, ever respond to my own voice on the radio. Because sometimes out there in the Appalachians, something doesn't need to chase you. It just needs you to walk the wrong way. I used to love camping near lakes. Nothing felt more calming than water at night. Still, quiet, reflective. There was something about waking up to cool mist hovering just above the surface that made me feel like I'd stepped outside everything wrong in the world for a little while. But I've never returned to a lakeshore since the night something called my name from across the water. Not yelled it, not echoed it, whistled it. Slowly, carefully, perfectly. It happened 3 summers ago. My best friend Ryan and I had both taken time off work after a rough year and decided we wanted a weekend off-grid. No phones, no contact, no digital noise. He suggested a lake he visited as a kid called Wyron Lake, tucked about 2 hours off the highway into dense northern woods. I'd never heard of it, and the rangers barely listed it on any official pamphlet anymore. We had to follow badly maintained dirt roads and then hike another mile carrying our gear. When we reached the water, I realized why he remembered it so fondly. The lake stretched wide and silent, surrounded by tall evergreens and the kind of blue sky that looked untouched by pollution. We found a clearing just a few feet from the shore, set up our tent, and watched the water rippling gently as the sun began to sink low. There was no one else around, no campsites, no litter, nothing man-made, except a weathered log half buried near the tree line that looked like it had been there for decades. The moment we finished setting up camp, I felt something shift inside me, in a good way at first, like stress actually loosened its grip on my thoughts for the first time in months. As night fell, Ryan built a fire, and we talked about childhood, stupid things we'd done growing up, old friends we hadn't spoken to in years. The kind of conversation you only have when the world feels simple for a little while. We cooked, laughed, and eventually sat quietly listening to frogs chattering far in the distance. Around 11, we decided to call it a night. I stretched out inside the tent and fell asleep quickly, lulled by distant water lapping the shore. I woke sometime after midnight. Not suddenly, not with fear, just that gentle drift toward consciousness when your body senses something's different. For a few seconds, I couldn't tell what pulled me out of sleep. Then I noticed something peculiar. The lake was absolutely still. No frogs, no insects, no wind in branches. Nothing. I listened harder. That kind of silence doesn't usually happen in forests. Ambience always fills the air from somewhere. But that night, it felt like every living creature had paused at the exact same time. I turned slightly, expecting to see Ryan asleep, but he wasn't next to me. His sleeping bag looked empty. I sat up, confused. He wasn't outside either, because I didn't hear footsteps, zipper movement, or anything. Panicking a little, I whispered his name. Nothing. I unzipped the tent slowly and peered out. The moon hovered bright above the lake like silver poured across glass. My eyes scanned the shoreline, expecting to see Ryan wandering around looking for firewood or taking a late piss. But he wasn't there. Then I saw him. Standing still at the water's edge, staring directly across the lake. He looked strange, completely motionless, arms at his sides, head tilted slightly upward. I stepped out barefoot and walked toward him. "Dude," I whispered loudly, "what are you doing?" He didn't answer. When I reached him, I realized he was breathing shallowly, eyes fixed on one spot across the lake as if he were concentrating to hear something faint. His face looked pale, almost blank, like his expression had emptied itself of emotion. I grabbed his shoulder gently, ready to shake him. Then I heard it. At first I thought it was wind, a soft, drawn-out whistle drifting from the far side of the water, rising up and trailing off like someone whistling a tune. Except it wasn't a tune exactly. It sounded purposeful. Each note spaced with intent, like whoever was making the sound wanted someone specific to hear it. I froze next to him. The whistling came again, a little louder, slow. A single long note followed by two short ones. I tried to form words, but my mouth felt glued shut, like speech itself would draw attention I didn't want. Then the whistle changed. It repeated, and this time the melody shifted into something eerily familiar, almost like the way someone calls a dog or tries to coax an animal closer. Another moment passed, and then my stomach turned ice cold. The whistle shaped itself into syllables. Ryan's name, not sung, not spoken, whistled, slowly, perfectly, like someone who already knew him intimately. My body locked up. I grabbed his arm harder. "We need to go back to the tent," I whispered, too terrified to speak normally. He didn't resist, but he walked slowly, like someone half asleep. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see someone across the lake with a flashlight or maybe a campfire, but the opposite shore remained entirely dark. Inside the tent, Ryan finally blinked back into himself, like he'd been underwater and just surfaced. "Did you hear someone calling?" he asked. Not frightened, just confused. I told him we should sleep and talk in the morning. Eventually, exhaustion pulled me down into uncomfortable dreams, filled with endless lakeshore darkness and whistling that never stopped. When morning arrived, everything looked the same. Nothing seemed disturbed. The lake shimmered peacefully under sunlight, and birds chirped as if nothing strange had happened at all. I almost convinced myself I'd dreamt it, until Ryan quietly said, "Do you think someone saw us arrive yesterday?" I stared at him a long moment. "What do you mean?" He looked embarrassed. "I don't know. It felt like someone was watching from the trees while we were unloading the car." I asked him why he didn't say anything. He shrugged. Didn't want to sound paranoid. His voice trembled just a little. That day, we hiked the trail that followed the lake in a wide arc. The farther we walked, the fewer signs of life we saw. No boot prints, no campsites, no fishing lines stuck between rocks. Nothing. At the far end of the shoreline, where the trees were tall enough to block sunlight, we found something that made my skin crawl. Some kind of old fire pit surrounded by stones covered in moss, like nobody had used it for decades. But deep inside the ashes, we found something like broken blue glass, melted into hardened lumps, as if someone burned bottles there. And resting on top of those melted shapes was a small, smooth pebble, with deep grooves carved deliberately into even parallel lines, like someone marked it with sharp stone. Ryan bent closer and whispered, "This isn't natural." Something in my body told me not to touch anything. We turned back early. The whistle is a basic tool. 3 short blasts for distress, 1 long blast to locate. Every ranger learns it on day 1, and every ranger is told the same thing. Never respond to a whistle unless you are absolutely certain it came from a person. I broke that rule once. It was late October, cold enough that the leaves had already dropped in most places, leaving the forest open in a way that makes distance deceptive. Sounds travel farther. Shapes look closer than they are. You can convince yourself you see movement where there is none, or miss it entirely when it's real. I was working a late shift covering a remote stretch of trail that cuts through a narrow valley. The trailhead is rarely used after summer, and by that point in the season, daylight fades early. Officially, hikers are advised to exit before dusk. Unofficially, people ignore that advice all the time. At 7:12 p.m., I heard a whistle. 3 short blasts. Clear, sharp, human. I stopped walking and listened. The sound came again, same pattern from somewhere uphill and off trail. The distance was hard to judge, but it didn't sound far. Close enough that someone could be injured and losing light fast. I radioed dispatch to report a possible lost hiker. They confirmed no active missing persons reports, but told me to investigate. I acknowledged and started uphill. I blew my own whistle once, long blast, the standard response. The answer came immediately. 3 short blasts, closer this time. I moved carefully, stepping over roots and loose stone, keeping my light angled low. I called out verbally, identified myself as a ranger, and asked whoever was there to respond. No voice came back, only the whistle. 3 short blasts. I told myself they might be conserving breath, might be injured, might not hear well. I climbed another 100 yards when the sound shifted position. Not closer exactly, sideways. Like whoever was whistling had moved laterally without me hearing footsteps. That should have been my cue to stop. Instead, I blew the whistle again. The response came faster this time, too fast, as if it had been waiting for me to finish. 3 short blasts, same pitch, same spacing, perfect. I realized then that I could no longer hear insects. The forest had gone quiet in that unnatural way that doesn't feel peaceful, just alert. My light beam seemed to die quicker than usual, swallowed by the trees instead of reflecting off them. I asked dispatch to update me if any hikers had checked in late at nearby trailheads. They said no. Then after a pause, they asked me to repeat my last transmission. I hadn't spoken. Before I could answer, the whistle sounded again. This time it came from downhill, behind me. I spun and swept the light across the slope I just climbed. Nothing stood there. No movement. No outline. No sound except my own breathing. I told dispatch the signal was moving. They suggested I hold position until backup arrived. I agreed, relief washing over me as I stopped advancing. That's when the whistle changed. 1 long blast, my signal. I didn't respond. My hands felt numb, fingers tight around the whistle cord like it was the only solid thing left. I hadn't blown that pattern. I was sure of it. Then it repeated. 1 long blast, closer. I backed toward a large oak, putting my back against the trunk so nothing could come from behind without me knowing. My light trembled as I held it steady, scanning the trees. I tried calling out again, louder now, telling whoever was there to speak, to identify themselves. The answer came as a voice. "Ranger," it said. The sound didn't travel the way voices normally do. It didn't echo or fade. It just appeared, like it had been placed in the air directly beside me. I asked where they were. "Right here," the voice replied. I turned slowly. The beam caught empty ground. The voice sounded like a man in his 30s, calm but strained, as if trying not to panic. I asked if he was injured. "Yes," it said, "my leg." I asked him not to move, told him help was coming, asked him to keep talking so I could locate him. "I can't," he said. "It learns when I talk." Something brushed the back of my jacket then. Light, almost accidental. I lunged forward instinctively, heart hammering, and spun again. Still nothing visible. No branches moving, no leaves disturbed. The whistle sounded again. 3 short blasts directly in front of me. I didn't answer. I keyed my radio and told dispatch to hurry. They said they were less than 15 minutes out. Then the voice spoke again. "You're standing where I was," it said. I asked him what he meant. "It stood behind me first," the voice continued. Then it learned the whistle. A shape shifted at the edge of my light, not stepping into view, just compressing the darkness slightly, like something tall adjusting its weight. I felt pressure in my ears, like altitude change, like the woods themselves were leaning inward. "Don't answer it again," the voice said quickly. "If you answer, it thinks you're lost too." The whistle blew. 1 long blast. My signal. I clamped my hands over my ears, but the sound seemed to bypass them, vibrating in my chest instead. My radio crackled with static, then a faint imitation of dispatch's voice asking for my status. It wasn't right. The cadence was wrong. The pauses too deliberate. I shouted into the radio that something was wrong, that I was staying put. The voice beside me whispered, "It knows your sound now." The pressure increased. My light flickered, then steadied. Then, without warning, the forest sound returned all at once. Insects buzzing, wind stirring leaves, normal night noise crashing back like a wave. The whistle stopped. The voice stopped. Backup found me standing against the oak, shaking so badly I couldn't speak at first. I told them everything once I could breathe again. They searched the area for over an hour. They found no injured hiker. They did find something else. About 30 yards downhill from where I'd stopped, they found disturbed leaves and a single broken whistle lying in the dirt. Park issued. Older model. Logged missing over a decade earlier after a ranger disappeared during a winter storm. No body was ever recovered in that case. After that night, I stopped carrying a whistle on night patrol. It's technically against regulation, but my supervisor didn't argue when I explained why. Sometimes, when I'm hiking during daylight, I hear faint whistling far off the trail. Always 3 short blasts, always just out of range. I never answer. Because out there in those mountains, getting lost isn't always about where you are. Sometimes it's about who responds. I booked the cabin because it looked quiet. Quiet was something I desperately needed after the year I'd had. Losing my job, losing my partner, losing my sense of direction. I wanted to be somewhere with enough space to think, far from the noise of the city, far from the reminders of everything that hadn't worked out. So when I found a listing for a small rental cabin in the Olympic foothills, a place with almost no cell service and only a handful of neighbors, I booked it for a full month. The listing mentioned nothing strange, just peace, nature, and solitude. I arrived late in the afternoon when the sun was already sliding behind the hills and the mist crept low between the fir trees. The cabin was older than the pictures suggested. Wood faded to a silvery gray, roof sagging slightly on one side, but it had charm, and it felt safe. Isolated, yes, but safe. Inside, the place smelled faintly of cedar and dust. Real wood floors creaked under my boots. The living room had a stone fireplace, a threadbare rug, a small couch, and a single wooden rocking chair in the corner. The kitchen was clean but dated, with appliances that looked older than me. Upstairs was a loft bedroom that overlooked the living area. It wasn't luxurious, but it was mine, for the month at least. I unpacked, made tea, and settled onto the couch. The quiet was everything I hoped it would be. No cars, no buzzing notifications, just the distant drip of rain on the roof and the occasional groan of old wood adjusting to the cool night air. At around 10 p.m., as the fire dimmed to a warm glow, I said aloud to myself, maybe this trip will actually help. And then, from somewhere deep inside the cabin, I heard a faint whisper. Help. I sat up straight. The sound was soft, barely audible, but unmistakable. It wasn't a settling sound of the house, or the wind, or the crackle of dying embers. It sounded like a word, echoing me. I held my breath listening. Silence. I waited another minute. Nothing happened. Eventually, I convinced myself I had misheard something. Maybe the fire popping, maybe the wind slipping through cracks. I forced myself to relax. I was wound up from stress, that's all. But after I went to bed in the loft and turned off the light, I heard it again, this time clearer. When I whispered good night, the cabin answered, night. Soft, far away, but undeniably a voice. I turned on the bedside lamp immediately, heart pounding. I looked down over the loft railing. Everything below was dark and still. The fire had died. The shadows were deep. The rocking chair sat motionless in the corner. I told myself I was exhausted, hearing things, imagining echoes. I left the light on and eventually fell asleep. The next morning, nothing strange happened. Birds chirped outside. The sun filtered through the branches. I felt calmer, embarrassed even, that the cabin's creaks had made me nervous. I spent most of the day hiking the trail behind the property. The forest was beautiful, ferns thick as blankets, moss covering the fallen logs, sunlight cutting through the canopy in pale green beams. I stayed out longer than planned, not eager to return to the silence of the cabin. When I finally came back around 5 p.m., I noticed something strange. The front door was slightly open, just an inch. I froze on the porch. I knew I had shut it that morning, not locked, but shut. I distinctly remembered hearing it click. I slowly pushed it open, heart pounding in my ears. No one was inside. Nothing looked disturbed. Nothing missing. I checked the windows, all locked from the inside. I checked the cabinets, the closets under the bed, nothing. No footprints except mine. I told myself the wind must have done it, though I didn't truly believe that. Still, there was no proof of anything else, so I tried to focus on making dinner. It wasn't until after dark that the cabin spoke again. I was sitting at the table eating canned soup, when without thinking, I muttered, "I should really get my life together." A moment later, from the far corner of the room, came a soft whisper, "Together." This time the voice was clearer, closer, not behind the walls. Inside the cabin, I slowly set my spoon down. "Is someone there?" I called softly. Silence. I stood and walked toward the corner where the sound had come from. It was near the fireplace, the section of the wall where the old stones met the wooden paneling. Shadows from the fire danced over the surface. I leaned closer. Nothing. When I backed away, the rocking chair creaked behind me. I spun around. The chair was moving. Barely. Just an inch of sway, but it was unmistakably rocking. I didn't go near it. Instead, I stepped back toward the kitchen, phone in hand, even though I had no signal. My heart was beating hard enough, I felt lightheaded. "Stop," I whispered, not even meaning to speak aloud. From the corner came the reply, "Stop." Something in the voice was wrong. It wasn't quite human. It held a kind of hollow resonance, like it wasn't speaking but replaying. I grabbed my coat, ready to leave the cabin and drive back to town. I didn't care that it was dark. I didn't care that the road was narrow and winding, I just needed out. But when I reached the door, before I could touch the handle, the cabin spoke again. This time, in a voice that didn't echo mine. It wasn't a replay. It was a response. "Don't go." My blood went cold. I backed away from the door slowly, eyes scanning every corner of the room. The sound hadn't come from the walls this time. It had come from upstairs, the loft. I grabbed the nearest object for protection, a fire poker, and crept toward the staircase. Step by step, the wooden railing creaked beneath my grip. Halfway up, I heard breathing. Soft, steady, wet somehow, like someone breathing with a mouthful of water. I reached the top of the stairs and froze. Someone was lying in my bed. The silhouette was unmistakable, a human shape under the blankets, head resting where my pillow should have been. The breath hitched in my throat. "What are you?" I whispered. The figure shifted beneath the covers. Then a voice, impossibly distorted, thick like it was coming from deep inside a cave, whispered, "You left the door open." I strangled a scream and turned to run, nearly tripping down the stairs. I grabbed my keys, flew out of the cabin barefoot, and sprinted through the cold night toward my car. The forest loomed around me, branches clawing at my clothes as I shoved myself inside the driver's seat. When I slammed the door shut, something slammed into the porch behind me. Hard. I didn't look. I didn't breathe. I took the job in Astoria because I needed a reset. My life in Portland had fallen apart fast. The breakup, the layoff, the constant noise and pressure, and I wanted something quieter, something that didn't remind me of everything I had failed at. When I saw a posting for a maintenance and inspection assistant at a small marina on the northern Oregon coast, I applied without thinking I'd get it. But 2 weeks later, I was living in a rented room above a bait shop with a view of the Columbia River and starting a job that mostly involved checking ropes, cleaning slips, and reporting damage to the harbor master. For the first few weeks, the job was exactly what I hoped for: quiet, repetitive, peaceful. I spent my days walking the docks, breathing in sea air, listening to gulls, and pretending the rest of the world didn't exist. But everything changed the morning I noticed the hole under Dock 3. It was low tide, and the mudflats stretched far out beneath the pilings. I crouched down to check for rot, scanning the beams with my flashlight, when I saw a dark opening in the mud, about 4 feet high and 3 feet across. A tunnel entrance, almost perfectly oval. At first, I thought it was natural erosion, the tide carving a groove under the structure, but the edges were too clean, too smooth, like something had dug it intentionally. I pointed my flashlight inside. The beam disappeared into darkness. The tunnel slanted downward farther than the light could reach, and the mud inside was untouched. No footprints, no drag marks, no claw marks. Just a long, smooth passage leading into the unknown. When I told Marcus, the harbor master, he frowned deeply. "There's no tunnel," he said flatly, not even looking up from his paperwork. "Marcus, You saw shadows," he interrupted. "Driftwood makes weird shapes, mud shifts. Don't worry about it." "But that's an order." The abruptness of his response rattled me more than the tunnel itself. Marcus wasn't the kind of guy who snapped. He was calm, steady, almost painfully ordinary. But when I mentioned the hole, his whole body stiffened like I'd said something I shouldn't have. After that, I couldn't stop thinking about it. 3 days later, at the next low tide, I went back. The tunnel was still there, bigger even, at least a foot wider than before. And this time, something else caught my eye. Near the entrance, half buried in mud, lay a small object. A boot, child-sized. I swallowed hard and crouched down. It was fresh, not waterlogged, not rotted, not covered in barnacles like anything left on the shoreline for long should have been. It looked placed. The mud around it was undisturbed, smooth and perfect, except for the slight sag of the boot's outline. I picked it up. The smell hit me immediately. Not rot, not sewage, not seaweed. Soil. Fresh, clean soil. The deep kind you dig from beneath layers of untouched earth. Why would a boot smell like dirt instead of salt water? I dropped it instinctively, my heart starting to race. Something wasn't right. I backed away from the tunnel, suddenly aware of how quiet the marina was. No gulls, no wind. Even the lapping waves seemed muted. Then, from deep inside the tunnel, I heard something faint. A single splash, followed by a second, then a third. Footsteps, in water, slow, deliberate, coming closer. My breath caught and I stumbled backward, nearly slipping in the mud. The footsteps grew louder, echoing slightly against the tunnel walls. They sounded heavy, too heavy to be a child, too heavy to be any animal I knew. Then they stopped, right at the edge of my flashlight's beam. I raised the light, barely daring to breathe. Something moved just out of view. I didn't stay long enough to see what. I ran back to the marina office, heart pounding in my ears, and burst through the door. Marcus looked up sharply. "I heard something in that tunnel," I gasped. "There's someone down there, or something, and we need to call. Stop." His voice cracked like a whip. I froze. Marcus stood slowly, his expression drained of color. "You didn't go in," he said, more a plea than a question. "No," I answered, "but something's in there." He closed his eyes tightly, exhaling like he'd been holding his breath for years. "Jesus," he whispered. "Not again." "Not again?" I repeated. "What does that mean?" He didn't answer. He grabbed his jacket and keys and marched toward the dock. "Show me," he said without turning back. When we reached the spot, the tide had risen just enough to cover the tunnel entrance. Only a small gap remained visible beneath the dock beams. Marcus stared at it with a look of quiet horror. "Damn it," he muttered. "Thought they filled it." "They?" I asked. Marcus didn't answer immediately. He knelt, pushing his hands through his hair. "You need to listen carefully," he said. "And when I'm done talking, you're going to go home, pack your things, and leave Astoria, tonight." He was trembling. "Marcus, what's in that tunnel?" He didn't look at me when he replied. "They dig," he murmured. "Always digging, always moving, and when the tunnels reach the docks, people go missing." My blood turned cold. "Who?" I whispered. Marcus shuddered. "Not who. Not anymore." Before I could ask anything else, a deep thud shook the dock. We both jumped. Another thud. Closer this time, then another. Wood creaked, bolts strained. The dock vibrated beneath our feet. "They're moving," Marcus said, his voice barely holding together. "They're waking up again." I stepped back instinctively. The thuds grew louder, traveling beneath the dock toward us, like something massive crawling through the tunnel system. "Marcus, we have to go." He didn't move. His eyes were fixed on the water below. "That's how it started last time," he whispered. "First the tunnel, then the sounds, then the hands." Hands? Before he could explain, something shot up from the gap in the dock, pale fingers gripping the edge of the beam, long and thin, coated in mud. I screamed. Marcus grabbed me by the arm and yanked me backward just as I never used to think about how thin tent fabric is. It's basically nothing, just a thin shell of nylon separating you from everything outside. Wind, rain, but also whatever else may exist in the dark that you're not supposed to hear. That realization didn't hit me until last summer, when I camped near Cold Creek, a river I'd visited dozens of times as a kid. My dad used to fish there. I grew up thinking of it as peaceful, familiar, safe. It was late July, peak heat. I'd been feeling trapped in routine, work, home, sleep, repeat, and I wanted some quiet. I planned the trip last minute, one night out there, back by Sunday afternoon. The weather forecast looked perfect. I packed light, tent, sleeping bag, water, food, and an old lantern. I didn't bother telling anyone exactly where I was going. I'd been there 100 times. I knew every inch of that forest. That's what I thought, at least. I got to the trailhead a little before 5. Sunlight slanted low between pines, casting those long golden beams that make everything look better than reality. I walked the familiar path toward the creek, about a half-mile in. The sound of water always relaxed me. When I reached the clearing, the river shimmered calmly, moving slow around worn rocks. Branches arched overhead and the air smelled like wet stone and cedar bark. Home, in the strangest way. I set up camp near where the ground flattened out. I could see river water just beyond some low bushes. Everything felt normal, grounding. I built a tiny fire, cooked, listened to insects whining through the heat. The kind of evening that eases your mind so slowly you don't realize you're finally relaxed until hours later. By 11, I crawled into the tent. It was warm, borderline hot. I lay there listening to the creek moving in the dark, steady, constant. I stared upward, half awake, thinking about childhood memories. My dad letting me throw rocks, teaching me knots, telling me how fish moved. I actually felt happy, comfortable, which is rare when camping alone. The tent never feels like home, but that night it almost did. Sometime after midnight, I fell into deep sleep. Then something ripped me out of it. Not sound exactly, pressure. Like the air thickened suddenly, or the darkness gained some kind of weight. My eyes shot open, and I lay there disoriented, blinking at faint shadows cast from moonlight through nylon. I tried to calm my breathing, but something felt wrong. Then I realized the night had gone silent, completely silent. No insects, no creek even. Like sound itself got strangled. I thought maybe I was dreaming. I held my breath and listened. Not a single sound outside. My ears strained for anything, wind, water, branches, but nothing moved. Then I heard it. Breathing. Very deep, extremely slow, almost wet sounding, like lungs expanding against something thick. It came from outside the tent, probably no more than a few feet away. The breathing wasn't frantic. It was steady, controlled, almost intentional. Whoever or whatever was breathing wasn't panicking. It was just existing outside, inhaling deeply, exhaling slowly, as if examining the tent. Every hair on my body rose. I didn't move. I was terrified that shifting even an inch would announce exactly where I was inside. The breathing continued, rhythmic and heavy, like someone extremely tall with huge lung capacity. The sound moved slightly, not pacing, just shifting weight. It wasn't animal panting. It wasn't human breathing from exercise. It felt unnatural, deep, slow, like someone was deliberately taking long breaths near the tent wall. Then it moved behind my head. I felt cold radiating through nylon, like something stood inches from me. My pulse hammered loud enough I worried the breathing thing would hear it. I listened as the inhaling stretched long, and the exhale rasped across tent fabric, like wind dragging through metal tubes. I squeezed my eyes shut and told myself it had to be wind. But wind doesn't inhale. Wind doesn't pause at the peak of a breath. And wind doesn't lean against fabric enough for you to hear its weight. I slowly reached for my phone, thinking maybe I could record it, proof I wasn't imagining things. My hand shook so badly I almost dropped it. Raising the screen, even dimmed, felt like exposing myself. The breathing shifted again, closer to the zipper, like it sensed subtle movement. I froze, phone halfway lifted, terrified to move even a millimeter. The breathing paused. For 2 whole seconds, I heard absolutely nothing, not even my own pulse. Then the inhale started again, right beside my shoulder this time, like someone was slowly exhaling against the tent fabric, not even 3 inches from me. I wanted to scream. I wanted to jump up, burst out, run through trees barefoot, anything. But fear held me perfectly still. My muscles locked, stomach clenched so tight I felt nauseous. The breathing shifted again, slowly moving across the side of the tent as if something massive was leaning forward, dragging itself along the outer layer of nylon. The sound felt huge, like the body making it took up half the clearing. I tried to convince myself it was a bear, but bears grunt, snort, shuffle. They don't breathe with such controlled, deliberate rhythm, and they don't lean inches from sleeping humans without making any other noise. Something enormous stood I've been a park ranger for 9 years, long enough to understand how the forest changes from week to week. Trails shift, animal paths appear and vanish, old logging roads collapse in rainstorms. Forests are living things, always reshaping themselves. But buildings don't just show up. Not here. Not in the North Cascades. Not in the middle of protected wilderness where no construction permits have been issued for decades. That's why I still don't understand what I saw that morning, or what happened after. My name is Aaron. Most of my work involves trail maintenance and backcountry patrols. Early October is my favorite time. Cool air, changing leaves, fewer tourists. On the morning everything changed, I hiked out before sunrise to check storm damage on Ridge Trail, a route I'd walked at least 50 times. Nothing felt unusual at first. The forest was quiet, fog drifted lazily across the ground. A few birds stirred in the canopy but stayed silent. I hiked about 4 miles before noticing something odd, a smell I didn't recognize. Not rot, not wildfire, not the clean scent of rain-soaked earth. Something chemical, sharp, faint but unmistakable. I slowed my pace, scanning the trees. Maybe a hiker spilled fuel or someone abandoned equipment. But the deeper I went, the stronger the smell became, until it hit me in a sudden wave. It wasn't fuel, it wasn't any chemical I knew. It smelled like sterilized metal, the scent of a hospital corridor. And then I saw the building through the fog. A ranger station, small, square, log walls with a green tin roof, a front porch with a bench, a flagpole, a wooden sign. It looked old, older than any structure built in the last 30 years, but it was clean, perfectly preserved, no moss on the logs, no rot, no leaf litter on the porch, no sign of wildlife scratching or nesting. I froze mid-step. This structure wasn't here yesterday. I was sure of it. The trail was direct, predictable. I walked it 3 times a week. There was no turnoff I'd missed, no hidden valley, no slope where a building could be tucked out of sight. It was simply impossible. I slowly approached, every instinct tightening in my chest. The morning fog thickened as I neared the porch, swirling around the railing in unnerving spirals. The chemical smell was strongest here, sharp enough to sting my nose. The wooden sign above the door read, Ridge Outpost to see, 1964. We didn't have a ridge outpost. We never had. My hand hovered over my radio, debating whether to call it in. But something in me hesitated. Not fear, not yet, but the strange sense that if I announced it out loud, something irreversible would happen. So instead, I knocked gently on the door. The sound echoed strangely, as though the interior were larger than the building suggested. Hollow. Too open. No answer. I tried the handle. It turned easily. The door creaked open. The smell hit me first, stronger inside, almost metallic enough to taste. The second thing I noticed was the temperature. It was cold. Not like a drafty cabin cold, more like walk-in refrigeration cold. Frost clung to the windowsill. In October, I stepped inside. At first glance, the station looked normal. Filing cabinets, a desk, a corkboard with faded papers, a radio console. But nothing was right. The papers on the desk were blank, every sheet, perfect white. The radio console wasn't plugged in. The map on the wall showed trails that didn't exist, routes winding into valleys that weren't real, rivers that ran in impossible directions, mountains mislabeled with names I'd never heard. Faint pencil marks dotted the map, small X's scattered across the wilderness. One X sat directly on my location. I backed away instinctively, hitting the desk behind me. My heartbeat thrummed in my ears. What the hell? Something shifted in the corner of the room. Not loudly, just a soft sound like fabric settling. But the air grew colder. My breath steamed out in front of me. I forced myself to look. Someone was sitting in the far corner, a ranger. At least the uniform matched ours, olive green shirt, brown pants, badge patch. But the face wasn't right, pale, too pale, almost translucent. Eyes wide and glassy, reflecting the dim light without focusing on anything. The ranger sat perfectly still, hands resting on their knees, posture unnaturally straight. "Hello?" I whispered. No reaction. I stepped closer, swallowed hard, and tried again. "Hey, are you okay?" Nothing, not even a blink. I moved slowly around them, trying to see the name tag, but there wasn't one, just a blank metal plate on the chest. The skin looked wrong, too smooth, like wax. My hand trembled as I reached out and stopped inches away from their shoulder. Their chest wasn't rising. They weren't breathing. I stepped back, pulse spiking. "Oh God!" Before I could reach my radio, a metallic click echoed behind me. The ranger station door slammed shut. The instant it closed, the radio console crackled to life, despite having no cables, no wires, no power source. Static burst through the speakers. Then a voice emerged. My voice. "Hello? Hey, are you okay?" My stomach dropped. The radio repeated it again and again, looping, warping, distorting. My own voice becoming hollow, stretched, unnatural. The room dimmed. Shadows lengthened. The wax-faced ranger's head began to tilt very slowly, far too slowly to be human, until their glassy eyes locked onto mine. I stumbled backward. The radio squealed with sharp feedback. Then a new voice layered beneath mine. Not human, not close. From the static came a whisper. "Stay." The temperature plunged. My breath fogged violently. The figure in the corner began to stand, stiff, jerking motions like a puppet pulled by too many strings. I didn't wait. I lunged for the door, twisted the handle, and felt it resist. The knob felt frozen solid, as if fused to the frame. Behind me, footsteps dragged across the floor, slow but steady. The voice on the radio whispered again, "Stay with us." "No." I slammed my shoulder into the door. The wood cracked but didn't give. I rammed it again, and on the third hit, the ice seal broke. Cold air exploded outward as the door flew open. I sprinted outside into the fog, heart hammering so violently I felt dizzy. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see what was following me. The fog outside was thicker now, swirling violently in unnatural eddies. The chemical smell burned my throat. Every part of me screamed to run, and I did. Branches whipped my face. Footsteps pounded behind me, too heavy, too rhythmic. The forest seemed to shift, trees rearranging subtly, paths bending in ways I didn't recognize. I stumbled onto the trail, nearly falling. Behind me, my father used to say that some towns don't die all at once. They hang on like stubborn patients, breathing slower each year, heartbeat growing quieter, but never fully going still. I never understood what he meant until I moved to Cooper's Timber, a nearly forgotten logging town tucked deep in the Pacific Northwest. I took a temporary mechanic's job at the municipal garage after leaving Seattle, trying to rebuild my life after a rough breakup and a career burnout. Cooper's Timber was the sort of place where time didn't seem to work right. The days were quiet, the nights too dark, and everything carried the same mossy smell of old forests, reclaiming what humans had tried to carve out. And then there was the mill. Even after decades of abandonment, the sawmill dominated the valley. Its rusted towers pierced the fog, its broken windows stared like hollow eyes, and its massive steel whistle, mounted high on its final standing smokestack, loomed over the town like a dead sentinel. According to town history, the mill shut down after the fire of '89. Nearly a dozen workers died that night, trapped by collapsing beams and suffocating smoke. The whistle, once used to mark shift changes, had blown 3 times during the fire, even though the heat had already melted every control line. Local folklore claimed the whistle still blew before tragedies. I thought it was superstition. I was wrong. The first time I heard it was my 13th day in town. It happened just after dusk when the fog rolled thick through the streets. I was walking home from the garage, hands shoved deep in my pockets, hood pulled tight against the cold drizzle that always seemed to fall this time of year. The streets were emptier than usual, lights dim, curtains drawn. A stray dog skulked toward an alley and vanished. And then the sound came, a long, deep blast. It cut through the fog with such force that it vibrated in my chest, the kind of sound that traveled through bone. The mill whistle. The mill's dead whistle, the one no one had been able to dismantle because the metal was fused after the fire. I stopped mid-step. The sound grew louder, echoing off the cliffs surrounding the town. Another blast, longer, more strained, like the whistle was being forced to scream through rusted lungs. A light flicked on inside a house down the street. A door opened. A woman stepped out, pale with dread. When she saw me, she froze. "Get inside," she shouted. "What?" I asked, but she was already backing through her doorway. Before I could speak again, an old man walking with a cane grabbed my jacket sleeve. His face was white as snow. "You hear that whistle?" he rasped. "That means someone's not making it through the night." "What are you talking about?" But he just shook his head, eyes full of a fear I didn't understand, and hobbled quickly toward the nearest porch. Windows slammed shut, lights went off, doors locked. Within 60 seconds, the entire town went still. Only I remained on the street. With that sound, that terrible sound. The whistle faded slowly, like someone running out of breath. The last note died out across the valley, leaving a ringing silence behind. I stared up at the mill through the fog. No lights, no movement, not even the shadow of wildlife, just the giant smokestack and the whistle perched at its top like a rusted gargoyle. The next morning, word spread that Gerald Payne had died in his sleep sometime during the night. Natural causes, the sheriff said. Natural causes that aligned perfectly with the whistle's cry. Over the next 2 weeks, I heard it blow 3 more times. Each time, someone died. A woman found at the bottom of her stairs, a logger crushed by a falling tree, a teenager who drowned in the river. The town treated it like routine weather. They didn't question it. They didn't talk about it. They didn't even acknowledge hearing it unless someone pressed them. They heard it, though. I saw it in their eyes. Everyone heard it. Everyone except the sheriff. Sheriff Dalton denied it every time. There's no working whistle, he insisted. You're hearing echoes, metal shifting in cold air. Superstition kills more people than accidents do. But then why did the coroner always look shaken? Why did the townspeople hide during the fog? Why did the pastor start holding extra services after each blast? I decided to find out. The mill was off limits, a collapsing hazard zone, but that didn't stop me. One evening, after the fog settled thick as wool, I walked there with a flashlight and crowbar tucked in my pack. The path was overgrown and muddy. Blackberry vines clawed at my jeans. Owls hooted in the distance. The smell of wet cedar mixed with the metallic tang of old machinery. As I approached the mill, my breath condensed in a cold, unnatural way. Something in the air felt wrong, too heavy, too still. My flashlight beam jittered across broken beams and twisted metal. The main entrance was half collapsed, so I slipped through a cracked section of wall. Inside, the smell hit me. Smoke, char, old fire, not lingering from decades past, fresh, as if the fire were still smoldering somewhere deeper inside. I moved cautiously through the vast open space. Puddles reflected my beam. Rusted conveyor belts hung like skeletal ribs. Piles of ash slumped in corners. The whistle tower rose dead center, supported by thick girders. The ladder leading up was warped but intact enough to climb. I approached it, shining my beam upward. The whistle looked larger up close. Thick metal tubes intertwined like veins. The rust made it appear almost organic, like the fossilized remains of a creature perched above me. A cold wind swept through the mill. The ladder rattled. And then, I heard footsteps, soft ones, behind me. "Sheriff Dalton?" I whispered hopefully. No answer. I slowly turned. A figure stood near the entrance, partially obscured by fog drifting through the cracks. A man, shoulders slumped, wearing what looked like a burned work uniform. "Hello?" I said quietly. The figure didn't respond. He simply raised an arm and pointed up the ladder, at the whistle, at me. "I don't understand," I whispered. He pointed again, more forcefully. The metal groaned overhead. I took a step back. The air thickened. The fog swirled into the building in a strange pattern, curling around the figure's legs, rising around his torso, twisting upward toward the whistle like it was being pulled. A low hum vibrated through the mill. I never used to think about recordings as anything more than paperwork. Audio logs were just another administrative burden, files that existed so supervisors could check boxes and lawyers could cover themselves. Most of us forgot they even existed, unless something went very wrong. That changed the winter I audited the archive. Every ranger is required to review a random sample of old dispatch recordings once a year. Most of the time, you skim through weather checks, routine patrol confirmations, wildlife sightings, nothing memorable. The files are dated, labeled by unit number, and stored in a system that automatically locks once finalized. You can't edit them without leaving a trail. That's important, because the file I found had my unit number on it, my voice inside it, and a date that hadn't happened yet. At first, I thought it was a formatting glitch. The database had been migrated the year before, and plenty of things got scrambled. But when I hovered over the file metadata, everything checked out. Timestamp, encryption key, checksum, clean. The date read 6 months in the future. I clicked play. The recording opened with ambient night noise, wind moving through hardwoods, insects faint but present, the low hiss of radio static. I recognized the sound immediately. It was the Eastern Ridge Corridor, a stretch of trail I patrolled often. The acoustics there are distinct. The terrain funnels sound in a way you don't forget once you've worked it long enough. Then my voice came through the speaker. Dispatch, Unit 12 checking in, beginning East Ridge Patrol. It wasn't similar to my voice. It was my voice. The pacing. The slight hesitation before the word dispatch. The way I cleared my throat without thinking. Even the faint sound of my boots shifting weight as I stood still to talk. I listened for a full minute, heart pounding, telling myself it had to be an old recording mislabeled. But the content didn't match anything I'd ever logged. I heard myself describe weather conditions that didn't align with any patrol I remembered. I mentioned a cold front that hadn't happened yet. I referenced trail conditions that hadn't changed at the time of the audit. Then I heard myself say something that made my hands go cold. Trail markers are off. There was a long pause in the recording. Wind noise picked up slightly, then my voice again, quieter. Something's walking it wrong. I stopped the playback. I sat there in the archive room staring at the screen, my reflection faint in the glass. I'd never said those words on duty. I would have remembered. Against my better judgment, I hit play again. Footsteps entered the recording. Not mine. Heavier, slower. Each step measured, deliberate, spaced too evenly to be human walking on uneven ground. My breathing changed. I could hear it. Shorter inhales, controlled but tense. Then I whispered, "It's repeating me." That sentence felt like ice sliding down my spine because I could hear something beneath it. Another sound, faint but present. A second cadence, slightly delayed. An echo that wasn't an echo. Then a second voice came through the channel. It used my call sign. It followed Ranger radio protocol perfectly. Unit 12 active, continuing patrol. The voice wasn't distorted. It wasn't robotic. It wasn't mocking. It was calm, confident, and wrong in a way I can't explain except to say it sounded practiced. The recording ended abruptly in a burst of static so sharp I flinched, even though I knew it was coming. I sat there for a long time afterward. I reported the file to my supervisor that afternoon. He assumed corruption. He always did when something didn't fit neatly into an explanation. He told me not to dwell on it, reminded me that stress and fatigue can make patterns where none exist. I tried to believe him. But 2 nights later, while on patrol, my radio turned on by itself. I hadn't touched it. I hadn't bumped the button. I was standing still, checking a trail marker when the channel opened. Unit 12, status check. It was dispatch's voice. I replied automatically because that's what you do. Unit 12, all clear. There was a pause. Then my voice came back through the speaker. Unit 12 active, continuing patrol. I stared at the radio in my hand like it had betrayed me. I told dispatch to confirm my last transmission. They hesitated, then said everything sounded normal on their end. But when I checked the system logs the next morning, there it was. A patrol confirmation logged at 2:17 a.m. from a location I had never been to that night. At first, I thought someone had accessed my credentials. Maybe a glitch, maybe human error. But the pattern kept repeating. Radio check-ins I didn't make, trail condition reports I didn't write, location pings drifting off my route by a few hundred yards, then returning. Always at night, always on the Eastern Ridge. I started recording my own patrols independently. Body cam on at all times. GPS tracker double-checked, personal notes written immediately after each shift. Everything matched my memory, except the official logs. They showed me walking where I hadn't been. One night, curiosity overpowered fear. I followed the false trail. I waited until just after midnight and deviated from my assigned route, heading toward the location where the system claimed I'd been patrolling without knowing it. The woods grew denser the farther I went, sound compressing unnaturally, like the forest was padded. That's when I saw the boot prints, fresh, same tread as mine, same wear pattern on the heel, same slight outward roll on the left foot. They weren't overlapping my tracks, they were ahead of me. I followed them until the trail narrowed into a corridor of trees where branches arched overhead like ribs. The air felt heavier there, pressing against my chest. My radio crackled. Unit 12, my voice said softly. You're behind schedule. I didn't answer. The footsteps ahead stopped. I stopped too. The woods held its breath. Then I heard it walking again, not away from me, not toward me, but matching my pace exactly, just out of sight. I backed away slowly, heart pounding, never turning my back. The radio whispered once more, "You don't need to be here anymore." I ran. I requested reassignment the next morning. Officially, it was due to stress-related concerns. Unofficially, I knew something had learned how to patrol better than I could. The archive file still exists. It updates. The date changes as time passes, always staying 6 months ahead. I stopped checking when I heard the final line evolve. Unit 12 no longer responding. Because the last time I reviewed it, the timestamp matched the future date of my next scheduled overnight patrol. And I'm not sure which one of us it's waiting for. The ground in the southern section of the park has a reputation. Rangers don't joke about it openly, but everyone who's worked the district long enough knows the phrase soft hollow. It isn't on any map. It isn't marked with signs. It doesn't trigger sinkhole alerts or erosion warnings. Officially, it's just another low-lying section of trail that drains poorly after rain. But the ground there never firms up. No matter how long it stays dry, your boots sink just slightly when you step into it, like the soil is remembering weight instead of resisting it. Not enough to trap you, just enough to notice. The first time I responded to a call near the soft hollow, it was for a missing teenager. Local kid, 16, experienced in the woods, cut through that section as a shortcut on his way home before dark. His parents reported him overdue around midnight. By dawn, we had a full search operation underway. His phone last pinged near the hollow. We established perimeter trails, ran dogs, flew a drone once the fog lifted. No sign of him, no clothing, no tracks leading out. But there were depressions in the trail, subtle at first. Slightly deeper footprints than expected, like someone had stood still too long in one spot. The soil there didn't spring back the way it should. It held the shape. By the end of the second day, the search leader made the call to suspend active tracking until morning. Weather was moving in, and visibility was dropping fast. I volunteered to stay overnight at the perimeter. I told myself it was to preserve the area, to prevent contamination. That was the official reason I logged. The truth was, I felt like leaving was wrong. Like walking away from that place was abandoning something unfinished. Around 1:40 a.m., the forest changed. It wasn't sudden, no sharp silence, no dramatic shift. Just a gradual thickening of the air like humidity without heat. My boots felt heavier, as if the ground beneath them had softened further. That's when I heard the voice. "Ranger?" It didn't come from the trees. It came from below me. I froze. I asked him to repeat himself, my voice steady out of habit even as my pulse spiked. "I'm here," the boy said. "I can hear you walking." I told him not to move, told him help was coming, asked where he was. "Under the trail," he replied. The ground beneath my boots shifted slightly, not collapsing, not sinking, just adjusting, like something settling into a better position. I backed away slowly until my heels hit firmer soil. My radio crackled with interference as I called command and told them we had contact. They asked for clarification. I didn't know how to explain it. The boy kept talking, voice calm, almost relaxed. "It's warmer down here," he said. "It doesn't hurt anymore." I asked him what he meant. "I fell," he replied, "but I didn't hit anything. It just opened." The soil in front of me bulged faintly, rising and falling once like a breath. I shined my light on it. The beam dulled instead of reflecting, swallowed by the ground like light into fabric. I told the boy to keep speaking, to stay awake. "There are others," he said. "They don't talk much." I asked who he meant. "People who stopped walking," he said. My stomach turned. He began describing what he could see beneath the trail. Roots hanging down like veins, layers of dirt pressed together, shifting slowly, shapes embedded in the soil, outlines of limbs, faces pressed just enough to be recognizable but not fully formed. "They're not dead," he said. "They're just resting." The ground shifted again, closer this time. My radio hissed, then went silent. I heard movement, not footsteps but compression, like something shifting weight under the surface. "Ranger," the boy said quietly. "It wants you to stop moving." I told him that wasn't going to happen. There was a pause, then his voice echoed back at me, not through the radio, from the ground, layered, distorted, deeper. The soil beneath my boots softened further. I stepped back hard, nearly losing balance, heart pounding. The trail behind me was still solid, but the boundary between firm ground and hollow had crept closer without me noticing. I shouted into the radio again. Nothing. The boy's voice returned, calmer now, slower. "It learns faster when you struggle," he said. "That's why they stop." I asked him if he could move his arms. "No," he said. "It holds you where you sink." The ground surged slightly, not enough to break the surface, but enough to ripple outward. I ran. I didn't look back until I reached the edge of the perimeter, where the soil hardened again. When I did, the hollow looked unchanged, flat, innocent, waiting. Search teams returned at first light. They marked the area, brought in ground-penetrating radar, soil specialists, everything we had. The readings made no sense. Density anomalies, voids where none should exist. Then solid mass again. Like the Earth, there didn't follow consistent rules. No body was recovered. Weeks passed. The case went cold. Then hikers started reporting voices. Always calm, always familiar, always coming from beneath the trail. They asked people to stop, to rest, to listen. Anyone who paused too long reported the ground feeling warm. The trail was officially rerouted 6 months later. The old section was quietly closed, listed as unstable terrain. But after heavy rain, the old path still appears. The soil darkens, the depressions return. And sometimes when I patrol nearby, my radio picks up a transmission with no signal source, a young voice. "Ranger?" I never answer, because the soft hollow doesn't chase you, it waits for you to stop walking.